I still remember that exact instant as if frozen in time, standing at the far end of the long mahogany conference table, placing a fresh set of acquisition documents into leather binders, while the room smelled of polished wood, expensive cologne, and authority. The CEO, Nathan Karile, who ran our multinational company like his personal kingdom, leaned back in his chair with that familiar smug grin. "Mandy," he said as if my name were a joke, "you're a secretary, not a lawyer. Maybe stick to stapling things, huh?" A few executives chuckled. Heat rose in my neck, but I said nothing, simply nodding and setting the binder before him. I had been at Carril Holdings for 8 years, starting as an admin assistant and evolving into the unofficial fixer, the quiet one who remembered every clause, every date, every footnote buried deep in contracts. But none of that mattered to Nathan. To him, I was furniture. Useful, silent, invisible. The meeting concerned the company's largest acquisition yet, a European logistics firm valued at $90 million, and while everyone buzzed with excitement over the closing deal, I couldn't ignore the tightening knot in my chest as I handed him the draft. "There's something here you might want legal to double-check," I whispered, tapping a section near the back. Nathan barely glanced. "Leave it. Look me in the eye. Page 312, subsection D. It technically allows third-party purchase rights under dormant license clauses," I pressed. He scoffed loudly. "Mandy, please. I have 3 Ivy League lawyers on this. If they're not worried, I'm not worried. And I don't pay you to think." The room went silent. Some smirked. Some looked away. I nodded. "Understood, sir." But inside, something shifted. Years of condescending remarks, subtle jabs, and glass ceilings had built this fire, and this moment was different. It was negligence, and I wouldn't let it slide. That night, under the guise of preparing meeting notes, I stayed late while the cleaning crew passed by, oblivious, because Mandy, the secretary, was always there, always invisible. I pored over every clause, every footnote, every cross-reference of the acquisition contract, and what I found chilled me. The dormant license clause was real and enforceable, allowing a third party to claim licensing rights for just $1 if submitted before the acquisition closed. A clause designed for emergencies, never meant to trigger, yet untouched and unnoticed. I stared at the legal print long past midnight, my hands trembling not with fear, but with something sharper, stronger. For the first time, I realized the real power didn't sit at the boardroom table. It belonged to those who understood the fine print. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. But I wasn't reckless, and I wasn't naive. I knew I'd need a plan, and more importantly, perfect timing, because the clock on the acquisition was ticking, and Nathan Carril had no idea that by the moment they tried to close their $90 million deal, I would already be the legal owner of exactly what they were trying to buy. The next morning, the office hummed with its usual rhythm, coffee brewing, keyboards clacking, small talk flowing like white noise. I sat at my desk outside the executive suite, reviewing emails, looking exactly like what they expected. The quiet secretary who made no waves. Yet under my blazer, folded neatly in my bag, sat a signed check for $1 and a printed claim form. I had called in a favor from an old college friend in corporate compliance who confirmed what I had already discovered. The dormant license clause was binding. Absurd, yes, but legally binding, left untouched from the original acquisition papers 20 years ago, and carried through every ownership change. According to international trade law, if someone submitted a formal claim and payment before a merger's finalization, that person could assume the licensing rights of the company's core logistics software. Without it, the acquisition would collapse. I wasn't a lawyer, but I didn't need to be. I only needed to follow the rules exactly as written. At 12:47 p.m., during lunch, I walked to a nearby notary office, signed the form, paid the filing fee, and submitted the claim legally and transparently, every document in perfect order. I handed over the $1 in cash. The notary, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, glanced at the figure and smirked. "Hope this works out for you," she said. I smiled back. "Me too." By the time I returned, nothing seemed different. Nathan's assistant gossiped with marketing. The CFO laughed on a call about golf. Nathan himself barked about synergy on the other side of the glass wall. I sat at my desk, typed a brief summary of my filing, and sent it to my personal email for safekeeping. The clock ticked, and for 2 days I began to wonder if I'd imagined it all, misread some legal nuance, risking my job, career, maybe even a lawsuit. But on the morning of the third day, things shifted. At 9:15 a.m., a lawyer from the acquisition firm stormed into Nathan's office. Low, clipped tones were exchanged. Nathan barked sharply once, then went quiet. By noon, the legal team huddled in the executive boardroom, and at 1:30 p.m., Nathan called the entire leadership team for an urgent update. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Hallway whispers carried enough. Some loophole claim, who filed it? The license is frozen. The deal can't close without it. I kept my head down, pretending not to listen. That afternoon, Nathan walked past my desk without a glance. The same man who had smirked 3 days ago now offered no expression. I went home that night with my heart pounding, not from fear, but from a strange mix of disbelief and calm. It was working, but it wasn't over. Men like Nathan Karile didn't fold quietly. They fought, bluffed, and crushed anything in their path, and I had just become a very inconvenient obstacle. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I reached the office. Nathan Karile's name flashed on the caller ID. I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering, then answered. "Mandy," he said, voice sharp but coated in thin corporate politeness. "I need you in my office now." I smiled slightly, though he couldn't see it. "Of course, sir," I replied steadily. Walking through the office toward that glass door, every gaze followed me. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready, because Nathan was about to realize this was one corporate secretary who didn't just know the rules. I knew how to play them. And this game had only just begun. Nathan's office was colder than usual, not from the air conditioning, but from the look on his face when I walked in. He stood by the window, hands in pockets, staring at the skyline like a general surveying a battlefield. I closed the door behind me. "Mandy," he said, finally turning, voice calm, almost casual. "Have a seat." I sat. He didn't. He began slowly. "A dormant license claim has been filed against the Handover acquisition." I said nothing, keeping my expression neutral. His jaw tightened. Imagine my surprise when I realized he meant my claim. "I followed the process outlined in the original contract," I said quietly. "It's a legal claim." He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Legal or not, you had no right. You had no authority. You blindsided this company and jeopardized a $90 million acquisition." I kept my hands folded on my lap. "Actually," I replied, "I exercised a public clause your legal team overlooked, and as of now, I hold the licensing rights the handover requires to operate in this market." His eyes darkened. "What are you playing at?" I blinked slowly. "Nothing, sir. I'm simply ensuring my rights as per the agreement terms." For a moment he said nothing. The silence stretched. Then, with a low chuckle, he circled behind his desk and sat down, folding his hands like a poker player about to raise the stakes. "You want money?" I tilted my head slightly. "Excuse me?" He gave a sharp smile. "Come on, let's not pretend. You saw an opportunity to grab a piece of this deal." "Fine. Name your price. I'll buy you out of this little stunt." "Clean. Quiet." I held his gaze. I hadn't filed the claim for money. His smile faltered. Then what? I leaned forward slightly. I filed it because you dismissed me like I didn't exist. You chose to ignore my warning, just as you've ignored everyone who wasn't sitting at this table with a title you respect. I'm not here to negotiate, Nathan. I'm here because this isn't your game to win by default anymore. For the first time, his confidence wavered. You realize, he said slowly, that this will not end well for you. I nodded. I realize it won't end well for you either. We stared in a silent standoff, the air between us razor sharp. Finally, he leaned back. You'll regret this, Mandy. I gave a small, polite smile. I'll take my chances. I stood and walked toward the door, but his voice stopped me just as I reached for the handle. You think you're smarter than me? I turned, meeting his gaze head-on. No, Nathan. I read the fine print, and then I left. The hours after our confrontation felt surreal. Back at my desk, heart pounding, I acted as if nothing had happened. The office buzzed with hushed voices and darting glances. Word travels fast in corporate halls, especially when a secretary walks into the CEO's office and comes out alive. By late afternoon, the legal team was scrambling. I overheard two junior associates whispering in the break room, "They can't close the deal without the license. Who even filed it?" "Mandy," someone replied. I kept walking, calm but alert. I knew Nathan wouldn't let this go quietly. The first blow landed before I even left the building. At 5:03 p.m., an email popped into my inbox from HR. Subject: Formal inquiry into conduct. Immediate response required. I opened it. Pulse steady. They were investigating me for unauthorized interference with corporate contractual agreements. I almost laughed. Almost. I had seen this tactic before. A classic move in corporate chess. Smear the opponent, discredit them, make them look like a rogue actor before they can defend themselves. But I was ready. I forwarded the HR email to my attorney. Yes, I had hired one 2 days ago. I wasn't walking into this unarmed. Nathan thought the game was still his, but he hadn't realized. I had already flipped the board. The HR inquiry wasn't a surprise, but what came next was. The following morning, I arrived early, determined to stay ahead of whatever Nathan had planned. The first thing I noticed was my computer locked. A red screen blinked back at me. Access restricted. Please contact IT. I took a slow breath. At 8:13 a.m., I was called into HR. Two people waited. One the head of HR, the other a corporate counsel I had never seen. We've temporarily suspended your system access, the HR director began, hands folded neatly on the table. Pending investigation into concerns raised by the executive office. I nodded calmly. Concerns relating to a lawful, documented license claim that I filed personally outside of company resources, I said. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. We're simply following protocol. I leaned back. So am I. I handed over a letter signed by my attorney, formally stating that any retaliatory action against me, including restricting access or assigning blame without evidence, would be met with legal response. The counsel's lips pressed into a thin line. Is that a threat, Miss Harris? He asked. I met his gaze evenly. No, it's a fact. Silence stretched. Finally, HR nodded stiffly. We'll review this with our department. I left the office without system access, but with something far better, a paper trail. By noon, whispers had grown louder. Fragments floated in the hallways. HR's on her now. She's finished. Crazy move. I walked past them all, face neutral, knowing exactly how this game worked. Nathan was trying to push me out before the board or shareholders discovered the truth. If I walked away now, it would confirm every accusation: unauthorized conduct, insubordination, breach of trust. But I wasn't walking away. At 2 p.m., I met my attorney in a small cafe 2 blocks from the office. Sharp, methodical, no theatrics. The kind of lawyer you want facing a corporate machine. He slid a folder across the table. We're filing a preemptive injunction. If they move against you, they'll have to explain everything in court. Public record. I glanced over the documents. Nathan won't risk that, I said quietly. He smiled slightly. That's the point. The next day, the office atmosphere shifted. Tension didn't dissolve. It thickened. But this time, it wasn't directed at me. It was Nathan. Word had started leaking. People asked questions. How did a secretary file a binding claim? Why hadn't legal caught it? Why was HR scrambling? The CFO avoided eye contact. 2 VPs whispered in the hallway as I passed. Then, late that afternoon, something I hadn't expected. A call from the chairman of the board. Mandy, this is Richard Clark. I believe we need a conversation. I sat across from him in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor. Unlike Nathan, Richard didn't posture. He listened. For 20 minutes, I laid it all out. The ignored warning, the loophole, Nathan's dismissal, the filing, the retaliation. I presented everything with calm, factual professionalism, documents laid out, evidence clear. When I finished, Richard sat back, hands steepled. You've put us in a difficult position, he said finally. I met his eyes. No, sir. Nathan did that. I followed the law. The company's leadership ignored it. He exhaled slowly, nodding. You're not wrong. A pause stretched. You've given us a lot to consider. I'd appreciate it if you didn't speak to the press in the meantime. I gave a small, polite smile. I'm not looking for headlines, Mr. Clark. I'm looking for accountability. He nodded slowly. Understood. As I stood, he said quietly, We'll be in touch. By the time I left that night, the office felt like a cracked facade, still standing but ready to collapse. Nathan thought this was a game of intimidation, but he forgot one thing. You can't intimidate someone who has nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. By Monday morning, the office no longer felt the same. Nothing obvious, no announcements, no dramatic firings, but the shift was in the air, in clipped conversations, nervous glances. Nathan wasn't holding court. His glass office door, normally wide open, was closed, blinds drawn, and Richard Clark, the chairman, was on site. Meetings shuffled, calendar invites changed, executives called upstairs for private discussions. HR kept their heads down. Legal moved in and out like silent messengers. I watched it all from my desk. Careful, quiet. By noon, rumors swirled. Emergency board review, compliance breach, Correl's future in question. I didn't feed them. I didn't need to. This time, I wasn't part of the Whisper network. I was at the center of it. At 2:15 p.m., I got the call. Boardroom now. Richard's assistant. I stood, smoothed my blazer, walked the long corridor toward the executive suite. The glass walls reflected my calm, composed image, exactly as I wanted to be seen. Every board member was seated. Nathan sat at the far end, face tight, jaw clenched, arms crossed. Richard gestured for me to sit across, one chair apart from Nathan. The room fell silent. Then Richard spoke. We've reviewed the documents Ms. Harris provided along with statements from legal, HR, and compliance, and consulted outside counsel. A few heads nodded. This acquisition has been jeopardized by a critical oversight. That is undeniable. The question now is how we handle both the business implications and the internal leadership issues that led us here. A murmur rippled through the room. Richard turned to me. Miss Harris, you filed a legal claim as a private individual using your own resources. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Were company resources used? No, sir. Did you act on proprietary information not available in public records? I shook my head. The clause I acted on was part of the original acquisition agreement, a public document accessible through corporate filings. Richard nodded. Thank you. He turned to Nathan. And you, Mr. Carelli, were made aware of this potential issue prior to the claim being filed. Nathan's jaw tightened. Yes or no? Yes, he muttered, nostrils flaring. Did you investigate the concern? He hesitated. I dismissed it. Silence fell. Richard leaned back, folding his hands. Noted. The next hour was a controlled dismantling. Nathan's mishandling of the deal, his refusal to escalate concerns, his attempt to retaliate through HR, and the formal complaint I submitted through counsel were all reviewed. Every move he made to discredit me became evidence against him. He tried excuses, half-truths, shifting blame, even claiming I acted out of spite. But the board wasn't buying it, and I didn't need to say much. The fact spoke louder than any defense. Finally, Richard delivered the verdict. Effective immediately, Nathan Carril is placed on administrative leave pending further review. The board will appoint interim leadership until a final decision regarding his position is made. Nathan opened his mouth, but Richard's raised hand silenced him. You may collect your personal belongings under supervision. Your access is revoked as of now. Nathan's face turned a deep shade of crimson. He shot me a look not of anger, but disbelief. I met his eyes with steady calm. For once, he had no words. When the board adjourned, Richard pulled me aside. You handled yourself with professionalism and restraint, he said quietly. I respect that. Thank you, sir. He gave a small nod. We'll need your help navigating the fallout. Hanover's lawyers are already asking questions. I nodded. I meant it. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about doing what Nathan never understood, protecting the company by doing the right thing. The official announcement came 2 days later. Nathan Carril stepped down as CEO, citing personal reasons. No press release, no farewell statement, just a quiet internal memo that landed in everyone's inbox before 9 a.m., though no one believed it. The office buzzed with whispered versions of the story. The board had pushed him out, the acquisition nearly collapsed, and somehow the secretary had been at the center of it all. I stayed silent. What mattered was the deal. With Nathan gone, the handover acquisition moved forward, but this time with full transparency. The board appointed Richard Clark as interim CEO and insisted on a revised negotiation team. To my surprise, he asked me to be part of it, not as a token assistant, not as a silent note-taker, but as a recognized advisor. You've proven you understand what's at stake, Richard said during our first strategy session, and you know better than most how to read between the lines. I accepted, but with conditions. I wouldn't be a figurehead. I wanted authority on compliance checks and contractual oversight, autonomy to speak freely without bureaucratic obstruction. Richard agreed without hesitation. Consider it done, he said. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked closely with the legal team, reviewing every detail of the acquisition paperwork. Hanover's attorneys were cautious but cooperative, especially after learning what had almost derailed the deal. When the acquisition finally closed, it was airtight. No loopholes, no oversights, no ego-driven mistakes. The deal made industry headlines, not for its size, but for the quiet shift in how it was handled. For once, a corporate giant closed a deal with integrity, without burying its mistakes under layers of spin. One evening, after signing the final documents, I found myself alone in the conference room, staring at the skyline. 8 years. 8 years of being underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. I had started this job thinking hard work alone would earn respect. I learned it doesn't. Sometimes you have to take respect, claim it, stand firm when others expect you to fold, and most of all, know your worth. before anyone else will. Richard joined me a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee, offering one to me. "You know," he said, settling into the chair across from me, "the board's been talking." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." He smiled faintly. "We want you to stay on, not just for compliance work. We're creating a new role, Director of Risk and Contract Strategy, reporting directly to the executive board." I blinked. "That's a real position." He chuckled. "It is now." I exhaled slowly. "Why me?" His smile faded into something sincere. "Because you didn't just protect this company from a financial disaster, you protected it from itself, without seeking credit, revenge, or personal gain." I studied him for a moment. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. "You earned it." The next morning, I moved into my new office, a modest space, no corner windows, no grand title on the door. I didn't care. This wasn't about a nameplate. It was about having a voice and ensuring no one else in this company would ever have to fight alone just to be heard. As for Nathan, the last I heard, he took a consulting gig on the West Coast. Smaller firm, fewer headlines. Maybe he learned something. Maybe not. That wasn't my concern anymore. Some battles you fight for survival, some for principle, and some because walking away means accepting the way things are when you know they should be better. I didn't set out to win a war. I just refused to lose quietly. And in the end, that made all the difference.